the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. From 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Vision radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear.
Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners, as well as actual radio listeners and listeners on YouTube later on. My name is Jerome, and I am the Sane Environmentalist. Today is 22nd Thursday of March 2018. Here in Eugene, Oregon, it is a cold, cloudy, rainy day. They say we're going to get 3 to 6 inches of snow later on. That should be an interesting thing to see. In the Northwest United States, at least, things are looking pretty healthy and green and climatically stable right now. I want to give a shout out to UCY.TV for hosting us, by the way. Thank you very much. You guys are providing a voice for so many individuals and a source for so much information for so many people. So yesterday I was talking about climate change. I was talking about the inevitability of climate change. Also about the unwillingness, apparently, on the part of humanity to make the literal sacrifices that are going to be necessary in order to curb that 4-degree critical point at which things start to really seriously break down. I've been doing a little bit of studying on, I don't know what you would call them. There are self-feeding cascading events that occur climatically when temperatures increase or decrease on a planetary level. And today, I'm going to bring a rocket scientist in. This lady's name is Laura Tenenbaum, and this is going to be from another TED Talk at University of California, San Diego. And Laura Tenenbaum is a senior scientist editor for the NASA's Global Climate Change publication and a member of the Earth Science Communications team at NASA's JPL. She develops new interactive media products to engage the public in climate and earth science. In her talk, she warns of the dangers of climate change and explores innovative ways of combating it. So, I'm thinking I'm online just fine. Let me play this real quick. Oh, we're still on the intro. So I'm going to assume I'm just fine because I had my pretty pictures on the radio. So the name of this talk that she did is Game On Climate Change, Game On. And this kind of talks about the hopefulness of it all. So, and talks about so without further ado,
And a neighbor comes up and he looks really upset. And he says to me, I'm worried about climate change. See, I've heard the ice sheets are melting so quickly that within a couple of decades, they're going to be gone. And while his dog Rascal and my dog Benny take turns, running around the yard, sniffing at stuff and lifting their legs, he looks me straight in the face. Die. So I'm really confused about the solutions to climate change, or I'm worried about the next climate catastrophe, or how much more time do people have left on this planet? Now, instead of force feeding you what I'd rather do is light these here balloons on fire, and then we can look at the science together. So this is a balloon filled with air, and you could probably predict what happens when I put the fire to it. It pops. But what happens if I put this fire onto a balloon filled with water?
just so you know, she has a balloon on a stand hanging down full of water, and she's standing there, flame burning directly on the bottom of the balloon.
Of performing the same science demo just a few days ago with a much bigger flame.
The bigger flame she's referring to here is literally one of those weed burners. I mean, it looks like a blowtorch shooting out of her, or a flamethrower shooting out of her arm at a balloon full of water, which does not pop.
So I have to tell you first that I like watching magic. In fact, I love watching magic, but I have exactly zero skill or talent in performing magic. This is absolutely not magic. This is science. And what's happening here is that the heat from the fire is being absorbed by the water in this balloon, just like that heat.
Publication. Come on. Honey. All right, I don't know what happened, folks. If I was online, offline, I'm a little confused. I must find a better way to do this. So, continuing on, trying to be patient with the world, Skype, and everything else. Definitely having issues, but it looks like I'm okay, so I'm going to continue on. Maybe I'm just illiterate. Excuse the interruption.
Like the heat from this fire is being absorbed by the balloon. And so much heat is absorbed by the balloon that it pulls it away from the latex, and that's why the balloon doesn't pop. So what's happened is that warmer water is expanding, and added to the water that's flowing into the ocean from the melting ice sheets and the melting glaciers, what we have is sea level rise. Additionally, my generation, your generation, everybody that's alive on planet Earth right now, and many, many future generations are going to have to cope with the consequences of today's climate change, even after we've moved away from burning fossil fuels and transitioned to renewable energy, because the heat is being stored in our ocean, just like the heat is being absorbed and stored in this balloon. And what that means is that we're going to have to face climate change for many, many hundreds of years. Now, I'm not telling you this to scare you, but to empower you so that we can make a difference, you and I, together. Because denying the science of climate change or avoiding facing the consequences of climate change or feeling so freaked out and so helpless, those are not solutions. What do you think might happen if instead of seeing climate change as this burden that we've got to drag along, this heavy weight that we've got to bear, what would happen if instead we thought about climate change as this amazing challenge? Because challenge is exciting and challenge is inspiring. Challenge makes us grow. Without struggle, without challenge, without discomfort, nobody would ever improve and nothing would ever get better. There's something special, something unique that happens when you try to do something that seems impossible. And that's very different from trying to do something that you already know that you can do. Can you imagine if us NASA people just sat around going, oh, that's too hard, every time some ginormous obstacle happens? Of course we don't. Let me just walk you through kind of a handful of steps that it takes going from conception to getting a fleet of Earth-orbiting satellites into space. So it starts by designing a scientific instrument, and that can take something on the order of a decade. And then oftentimes these scientific instruments are tested on modified NASA aircraft. And a modified NASA aircraft is basically just an airplane with a bunch of holes in it so that the scientific instruments can stick out. And then what happens, the seats are removed, or many of them, and the instruments are put inside the plane, and then you get all kinds of things like racks of computers and a whole bunch of cables, and then the scientists and the engineers get in that plane and they fly around testing the instruments. Now, while that's going on, you have software engineers starting to write code. And oftentimes the code has to be written for hardware that doesn't even exist yet. And that sounds about as complicated as you may think it does. Then the spacecraft is assembled in a clean room, folded up, tucked into a nose cone that's put on top of a rocket that's launched into space and achieves orbit. Piece of cake, right? So right now what we have is 20 handmade, one-of-a-kind, unique scientific experimental instruments dedicated exclusively to studying Earth's climate and Earth science. And you would think that once all these get into orbit, it would be smooth sailing, right? But the truth is that each one of them is sending down reams upon reams of data every day. And all of that data needs to be validated at ground stations, not just once, but over and over and over again, because the world absolutely must have accurate science data, especially about climate change. And what this means is that somebody somewhere sometime is troubleshooting something just about all day, every day. And the thing is, we kind of like it. We think it's cool. And that's because we understand that scientific experimentation involves struggle. And we also understand that grit and determination will get you everywhere. And I tell you, when somebody who works at NASA uses the term everywhere, we literally mean everywhere. So a few years ago, a group of third graders came to visit NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, where I work. And they were being really well behaved, so I decided to rile them up because field trips are supposed to be fun as well as educational. So I was all like, who likes Justin Bieber? And they were all like, ah! And then I said, who wants to be a scientist when you grow up? And it was dead silence. So finally, this little kid in the front row, he comes forward and he says, I'm not smart enough to be a scientist. And so I puffed myself up real big as though I'm going to take on the person who made him feel bad about himself. And I said, who told you that? And he said, I thought it in my own mind. Now remember, these kids are 9 years old. So I looked at the class and I said, how many of you thought in your own mind that you're not smart enough? And about 3/4 of the class raised their hand. Now I understand how these kids feel. I have to be honest with you, I have not had doubt about my intellectual ability or my mental capacity, but I have always felt like I did not belong in the field of science. When I was in third grade, somebody came to our class and they said, maybe you could be the first female astronaut. And I remember very specifically thinking, no, I couldn't.
Excuse you.
Not me. And I stayed disconnected from science all the way through high school and on into college. And even today at my job, I often feel like a misfit and like I don't belong. I feel more comfortable with artists and athletes than I do with people who have a PhD. Maybe it's some stereotype that I bought into that I don't even understand, or a preconceived notion about how a science person is supposed to behave. Maybe it's I have an idea in my head that I'm supposed to be sitting nicely at my desk when what I really would want to be doing is this. But that day, I told those third graders the same thing that I had learned to tell my inner third grade self. And I hope it's the same thing that you decide to tell your inner third grade self today. And that is, all of us have a natural-born scientist, curious about the way the world works. All of us have an inner science spark that could be ignited into a glorious flame. And all of us need to stay connected to the conversations that are happening around climate change, even when it's hard, even when we feel like running, even when we feel hopeless, especially when we feel hopeless. It wasn't until I was in my junior year in college when I first became connected to science. I was taking an oceanography class and we started studying sea slugs. Yeah, sea slugs. The sea slug changed my life. So I was an avid scuba diver at the time, and I never noticed them until we learned about them in class. And then all of a sudden I started to see them everywhere. And it wasn't like they had just came there just for me. They'd been there the whole time, and I'd been swimming so quickly I'd never noticed them. And it made me wonder, what else would I start to notice if only I slowed down long enough to pay attention? They seemed small and vulnerable and delicate, and I identified with that. And what the sea slug taught me was to value something, to make something so important to me, to make something that I cared about so much that it was more important than my struggle and my challenge and my discomfort. So as individuals and as a society and as a global society, in order to move away from fossil fuels so that we can lower our carbon footprint and mitigate the climate change that's already happening, and as individuals and as a society and as a global society, if we're going to adapt to the climate change that's already set in motion, then as individuals and as a society and as a global society, we could find things about our environment, about the natural world, about this planet that are so important to us that we care more about them than we care about our struggles and our challenges and our discomfort. At the entrance to NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory where I work is a sign, and it says, "Dare Mighty Things." And I walk past those 3 words multiple times a day because they're also in the office building where I work. And the way I see it, that sign is talking directly to me. I dare you, it says. I dare you. Not to try something easy, not to try something that I already know I can do, but that sign is daring me to run towards something hard. And now I dare you. Decide to stay with science. Go home and light your own water balloon on fire. And if you're a kid, find an adult to help you. So there's 2 things I want you to know about this. One is, and this is the most important perhaps, I just told you to do this experiment at home. What I meant is this experiment, not that one. So I'm wearing a lot of fire protective gear here. And what you don't see is just off frame, there's a bunch of people with fire extinguishers. And yes, it was exciting. And yes, it was challenging to put on that fire gear and put my arm in that fire. But more importantly, inside those flames is a water balloon that did not pop, even though I held it there until my arm was tired. It took about half an hour, and I finally just got tired. And what I want you to remember is that climate change is serious. That water in that balloon absorbed the heat from that fire in the same way that right now our ocean is absorbing the heat from global warming. So let's light the world on fire, not by burning fossil fuels, but with our burning desire to understand the world around us. What would happen if we ran toward the challenge of climate change with confidence, strength, and courage? Perhaps our story could be a shared story about not giving up. Perhaps our story could be a shared story about moving forward. So when your neighbor comes up to you and they look upset and they say, "I'm worried about climate change and the ice sheet's melting," and they ask you, "Do you think it's too late?" I hope you decide to look them straight in the face. And I hope you decide to tell them, no, it is not too late. We got this. Game on, climate change. Game on.
I hope that inspired people as much as it has inspired me. It bespeaks many things about the science, about women in science and artists, and who is a scientist, and what can we do. And I think the water balloon experiment, at first, I have to admit, seems kind of hokey to me. It's like, well, what's the point of that? But what the point is that imagine there's a giant torch burning the planet, and the only thing absorbing the heat and keeping the skin of the planet from burning through is the water, the oceans. And so the oceans are indeed absorbing all of this extra heat. And once that gets to a certain point, because heat doesn't really go away either, it just circulates around. So once it gets to a certain point, then you will start to see, let's put it this way, okay? If you took that same balloon of water and set up a stand with a flame on it and just let it run, eventually the water in the balloon would boil and cause the balloon to rupture. Okay, so it's not like the water will forever keep the balloon from popping, and it will get to a sudden point. It'll go from just fine to popped just that quick. Okay, and think about it. Think about how similar the Earth is going to be to that. We're going to get to a point, and suddenly it's going to just pop. And what that means is things will dramatically shift. I think one of the main things that will dramatically shift is that we will start to see methane releases huge methane releases. As well, the acidification of the oceans is as they warm up, they get more acidic. And as they acidify, they start dissolving the calcium carbonate in a balanced way and releasing it back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Because acid oxidizes things. It adds an oxygen molecule to things. And if you think about it, there's a lot of calcium carbonate, and the warming water releases that, which causes more warming, which melts more ice, which releases more methane, and pretty soon we're going to have a whole different place. And according to this scientist, it's literally would somehow magically work its way out, but it's a gas and it's not going anywhere, and it's not going to change to anything else. It doesn't degrade or decompose. It is what it is. It's an element, or it's not an element. It's a gas. The only thing that I know of really that decomposes it is CO2 is a plant, which absorbs the carbon and releases the oxygen. That's the only thing I can think of. Which leads me to the next point. And I want to ask everybody who might still be listening that didn't get tired of the dead air, and boy, I feel bad about that. I'm still not sure what happened. I think what I need to start doing is I have a new PC. I'm waiting on a network card today, and it's a stable beast. And so right now I'm using my cell phone. I think maybe the cell network's dropping out or something. I don't know, but I apologize for that, guys. But anybody who is still listening, I ask you, how many trees have you planted since you were born? How many? If every human planted 10 trees, that would make a gigantic difference to their individual. Probably 10 good-sized trees is enough to absorb quite a bit of the carbon emitted by a human. And that's a lot, and the leaves from the trees then work their way into the soil, and it goes back, it gets sequestered. And so what we need to do is, while we're emitting and producing carbon dioxide, we need to sequester an equal amount in the form of plants or something else. Figure out a technology that literally pulls carbon in a photosynthesis-like process out of the air, even if it takes energy to do it. You might be able to figure out a way. And that's where scientists come in. And here again, we go back to this little talk we just heard. And she was talking about, what do you think it takes when somebody conceived of the concept of putting a fleet of satellites, not just one, and remaining in control of them, and but it can be done. That just shows that it can be done. If we could figure out a way to use solar power to sequester carbon dioxide, I think that might be the key. Use solar energy to sequester carbon dioxide in some sort of mass. Can't really call it biomass because it's not living, but a carbon mass. It'd probably be a coal-like thing, and you could actually literally burn that again, oxidize it again, and turn it back into CO2. There is a possibility of a renewable carbon cycle, if we could figure out a way to pull it back out of the atmosphere and make it solid again so we can burn it. Does that make sense? You know, because carbon is endlessly recyclable that way. It's just wonderful. It's the stuff of life. You know, and as much as we demonize carbon dioxide, carbon is the stuff of life. You know, it's the basis for all life that we know of, anyway. You know, there might be other types of life forms out there that are silicone-based or something else, but as far as we know, all life is carbon-based. It uses a carbon-oxygen exchange system pretty much to exist, as we understand it. There might be some exceptions to that rule, but I don't know. So that's it. We all need to agree to plant trees. You know, how can we as citizens of the world encourage that? You know, I've never planted a tree, I'll be honest. But you know what? I can get a tree. I just saw one yesterday. They're like, little baby trees are like $40. So I'm thinking, if I planted 10 trees, that'd be $400. And that would offset, since I don't drive a car, my entire carbon footprint, damn near right there. 10 trees, you know, it wouldn't immediately absorb the carbon I'm producing, but as they get bigger, then they would absorb the carbon that I'm producing, and then some, and then some, and then after I'm dead, continue to absorb the carbon. And after my supposed grandchildren are dead, according to the trees I'm looking at here, which are 4 to 5 feet across, continue to absorb carbon. So there you go. We need to figure out ways to sequester the carbon out of the atmosphere. That's the only real possible way. And we need to make it a way that third world countries and low resource countries and low technology countries are able to use. And there you go, plants. You know, so we need an army of people planting and growing trees on our planet. If we could plant 1 million trees a year, I think that might actually offset quite a bit the carbon footprint that we're creating. And it would green up the planet. It would produce more oxygen. One of the things I noticed about when I came to Oregon from Arizona, which is pretty barren, not much in the way of green, is that it seems my brain works more fluidly here, and I think that's because there's more oxygen in the air. And there's more oxygen in the air just because I'm completely and totally surrounded by living green, photosynthesizing things everywhere. You walk outside the door of this place and it's like, oxygen. See, oxygen's good because it allows us to oxidize carbon. That makes us feel better when we're able to more efficiently oxidize our carbon and create CO2. You know, and like, again, carbon is the stuff of life. So our friends, the trees, which it is unfortunate that we are cutting down at such a rapid pace. I've done a few Google Earth surveys of some of the rainforests in the Amazon and other places, and there's a large swaths that have been carved out and turned into, well, basically desert. You know, what you got right under, literally, that thin layer of the rainforest is you have red sand and a desert. The whole biosphere is self-sustaining, and it's kind of like a moss. If you think about the rainforest, think about it like a big moss. You know, if anybody who's seen a bucket that's been sitting in a place and moss has grown, and maybe it's got those little tall ones that stick up here and there, it's all different little plants, but it's one thing, you know, and that's what the rainforest is. And so when you start picking it apart, you know, then it destroys it. Just like any creature that you pick apart, it's going to kill it. You know, just because you you pick one of the legs off of an insect, you think that's going to kill it? Oh, probably, you know. So an organism needs all of its parts, and it's in balance with itself, generally speaking. So we need to maybe think about boycotting any products that come from those areas of the world, from Brazil, until they start to really seriously protect the rainforest and replant. You know, but you can't really replant the rainforest, because as soon as you cut down all the trees and run back and forth with tractors, the topsoil basically dissolves and goes away, and it's only literally inches thick. And under that, you have red sand, and it dunes up and it turns into a desert in that little area. And nothing will grow there because there's no soil. The soil literally has to regrow. It's like moss. It has to regrow from the edge of the forest every year, a little bit more and a little bit more, until it eventually closes up that wound. So, you know, we need to protect the rainforest, and we need to plant trees, and we need to support anybody who comes up with a way to sequester carbon. You know, if there was, let's put it this way, I hate nuclear, but if there was any good use for nuclear power, it would be in the sequestration of carbon, because you could have one nuclear power plant, which is barely carbon neutral, remove gigatons of carbon out of the atmosphere. And there's a way to oxidize the or split the atoms apart. I know there is. And remove the carbon. If you remove the carbon from the air, then you remove the CO2. So that's what trees are doing and plants are doing. They're basically just taking and sucking the carbon out of the air and releasing the oxygen. And so it would do the same thing. The process would release massive amounts of oxygen. You know, how do they build pure oxygen? They probably pull apart CO2. You know, I don't know. You might have to zap it or something. It's definitely probably energy intensive. But you know, it's like plants use the sun, so they use solar energy. You know, and if we could use solar energy, that would be the best thing. So where in the middle of the Arizona desert, you've got carbon sequestration plants that are literally scrubbing the carbon out of the air, turning it into a reusable fuel source that you can then, in turn, at that point, just burn to remove the carbon from the air. And you might be able to make it efficient enough to where the process removes more carbon than it burns, at which point you have a net gain, at which point you have a tree. You know, so the tree does still have its carbon, and when a tree dies, it pretty much releases its carbon, a lot of it, back into the atmosphere. You know, and so deforestation has a dual effect. Not only does it remove the oxygen scrubbing equipment from that area, but it also causes the carbon that was sequestered in the oxygen scrubbing equipment to be released again. So it's really a double whammy against the whole carbon cycle of the planet. You know, we need to be encouraging trees, one tree per person. We need to create a campaign. I'm going to create a campaign. I'm going to figure out a way to create a campaign to plant trees, you know, everywhere, all over the world. What do you guys think of that? You know, actually, I'll probably make a YouTube video and put together some sort of an idea today, because that's a mission. I think that's a worthy mission, and it's the only logical thing that I can think of. So, you know, that's hopeful. Okay, right? We're trying to be hopeful today. We're trying to not go into gloom and doom. You know, and here's an interesting. This is an interesting survey they did. I side with .com Polls Environmental. This is the most popular environmental issues of 2018. And number 1, climate change. Number 2, alternative energy. See how those are the most popular. So you could combine those two, because we obviously have the problem with climate change, and we obviously are trying to promote alternative energy. So, you know, we do need an alternative, or a way to sequester. Third is the Paris Climate Agreement, and should the U.S. withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. Fourth is fracking, and people do not support that. The Dakota Access Pipeline is fifth. Oil drilling is sixth, and plastic product bans are 7. You know, because we are doing massive destruction to our planet in all these different ways. And Paris Climate Agreement, I don't really know about that. I don't know they can, unless they start doing real life things. You know, I think what the Paris Climate Agreement does is it is actually a way to create a carbon taxation system. Maybe that's what we need. Maybe that is the solution, is make it cost money to emit carbon. That's one thing you can do. You know, I would say that instead of a carbon tax, okay, have a carbon offset fee. Okay, I am a power plant. I emit so many gigatons a year of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So I have to plant so many trees or invest so much money into carbon sequestration technology in order to offset the carbon that I'm producing, literally and directly offset the carbon that I'm producing. You know, and do you see how that right there? You know, okay, well, we're encouraging the world. Anybody who's part of this accord has to agree. You know, if there's any African nations or South American nations, you know, that could be a big win-win. If you get people to start planting trees back in Brazil, because and investing instead of a tax on it, invest in, because see, a tax is that going to one person. It's just a useless thing. You know, and people will, well, no, you can use tax money for this or that, but a tax money is just the fact that it's a tax. Now you lose so much value from the actual money itself, because now everybody gets their little chunk. Versus, okay, so you're producing and emitting 100 pounds of CO2. You have to plant one tree. For every 100 pounds, it's one tree. You know? And, or it's $1,000 into investment into carbon dioxide sequestration technology. One of the two. Imagine the impact that would have if that was a global thing. If everybody had to follow those rules. Imagine the impact that would have, and how quickly and easily climate change would go away. It would be gone so quick it's not even funny. All of a sudden, we'd have less carbon, and it would start getting cold. Well, we're going to have to start emitting carbon dioxide because it's getting cold now. Oh, gosh. So then what do? Cut down forests, those pesky forests. So what we would be doing is looking at the resources in the environment as assets on a balance sheet. You know, the carbon in the very air as assets on a balance sheet. Just like we are all assets on a balance sheet. So we need to work out ways that are logical, folks, and that are hopeful, and that are exciting. You know, nothing excites me more than the idea of creating whole new forests. You know, each power plant would produce a forest. Think about it. You know, like, for instance, let's look at Fukushima for a second, around that power plant. They had a bunch of acres of woods all around the Fukushima Daiichi power plant before the accident. And today, well, where those woods where you have tank farms, but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trees got cut down for those tank farms. And that right there, I mean, I'm going to figure it out, and I'll report on this next week. How much carbon does a tree sequester? All right. Sorry, folks, got dropped again. Yeah, I need to figure out a better way to do this because this just is not going to work. I find it very, very annoying. We must be coming up on 8:46. So let's figure out a way, folks. I'm going to create a campaign starting today. Probably it'll go live April 4/20. So look forward to the 420 tree planting celebration. It'll be on YouTube and everywhere. So yeah, the Paris Climate Agreement. I think I have mixed feelings about that. 52% said yes. 48% said no. Yes, until other countries are held to the same standards. I don't know about that either. So Trump announced in June 2017 that we would withdraw the accord in an effort to boost the nation's industry and energy independence. He argued that the climate accord was unfair to the U.S. since the agreement imposed easier restrictions on China and India, who lead the world in carbon emissions. Opponents of the climate agreement argue that it unfairly penalizes U.S. energy companies and consumers by imposing restrictions on domestic energy production. Proponents of the climate accord agree that it sets back decades of diplomatic efforts by the U.S. government to reduce worldwide carbon emissions. Decades, they say. Decades of diplomatic efforts. Well, so what? Diplomatic efforts are just a waste of money. We need action. We don't need words anymore, folks. What I'm sitting here talking, blah, 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 so many words. What we need is action. What we need is people to make a pledge to plant trees in order to offset their personal carbon footprint. And we need to do it globally. We need to figure out a way to mobilize people in Europe and South America and Africa and China and other parts of Asia, as well as the Soviet Union. Because we need to realize, there has to come a time when we realize that we are one world population, independent of country and everything else. We all share the same environment. And I think maybe that's what the Paris Climate Accord was kind of about, was a kind of an acknowledgement, if you will, that we are all just humans on the planet, despite our differences in nation or culture. We are all just humans on the planet. I think that, honestly, between you and I think that the oligarchs are trying to get a hold of the politics and the diplomacy, if you will, of climate change. And that's why they got set back decades, because they had a plan. And I don't know that the plan included the reduction of carbon in the atmosphere. I'm sorry, but I don't know that it does. I don't trust governments. I don't trust that they have my best interests at heart. I know they don't. I know for a fact that the United States government is not my buddy, is not my pal, does not like my radio show or my YouTube channel or anything about me. I'm a felon. I'm a pot grower. I'm a rebel. They don't like that. I'm a free thinker. I'd ask questions. I always have. I can't tell you how many people I've made angry in my life by asking questions, and they're like, well, I lost a girlfriend over that. She used to quote this study, and they said in that study, and finally I was like, well, which study? She's like, what? I said, well, okay, you're telling me this fact that I need to accept this fact based on a study that you read. Which study? And she couldn't tell me the study, and she was a science person, and use that. Studies say that this, and studies say that. I don't want to hear that. I want to hear, according to so-and-so in a study published by the blah-blah-blah at this date with the title that, this is what this means. And here's the link to that so that you can investigate it for yourself. If you're going to approach me as a scientist and act like a scientist, don't act like I'm just an idiot that won't know the difference. So, humanity, we need to wake up. We need to realize that we are, indeed, a species on a planet, just like every other species on the planet. And we are unique in our need for energy, and we will get our energy. But we're also very clever. And I envision that it could go the other way. It could change suddenly also. If we just got our minds right and started doing the tree thing and doing the carbon sequester thing. I mean, if you can figure out a nuclear power plant, then you can figure out how to crack a CO2 molecule apart and extract the oxygen, the carbon, and let the oxygen go. I'm going to actually investigate that. That'll be part of next week's show. So, it's like, that's the key. So I guess I'm going to call it 1 tree per 100 pounds of carbon. For every 100 pounds of carbon that you sequester, that you emit, you should plant 1 tree. That would mean that over a lifetime of a human, you'd probably end up with about 10 or 20 trees from non-biological, non-renewable carbon sources. Okay, there is a stipulation and a difference there. Okay, there is above the skin carbon and below the skin carbon. The above the skin carbon is everything that you look at that's alive around you. Most of the materials are mostly made up of carbon. And, and those things are a part of the carbon cycle of the planet. They evolve, they emit, they absorb, and it's part of a cycle, When you dig under the skin into the dead carbon from the old biospheres and start emitting that into the atmosphere, now you're emitting, I guess you could call it fossil carbon. And that fossil carbon is not part of the natural balance, and that's what we've been doing for, God, a long time. Since we started burning oil, since we started pulling material from under the skin of the earth and burning it, that's where the problem started. And I think that probably, I bet you back in the 1700s, they found pools of oil here or there that they burned that were petro oil from under the ground that bubbled up, perhaps, or tar or something that would have been not part of the biosphere, as the active biosphere. But it was probably in the mid-1800s we started. It's a wonderful thing. That's what has created human society as we know it today. That's what has created our technology, our comfort, our homes, our everything, is our ability to burn oil. Why do you think they call us a petrodollar economy? That's because we do have an oil-based economy. The whole thing is based on the energy that it takes to power our lives, our cell phones and our cars and our homes and our businesses. Without it, we're dead in the water. You know, if for instance, they could only produce 1/10 of the energy they do right now, and that would be in balance with, more or less, or at least slow down the carbon cycle, the overload of the carbon cycle, then it would become only the richest of rich would have electricity. Everybody else would be stuck to trying to find locally available fuel. And the only locally available fuel is trees. And so what would we do? We'd cut down the trees. You know, if there's no coal, I mean, you cut down all the trees. How long would the trees last? You know, if humanity had no other source of fuel to heat its homes and you know, it would be a disaster of unmitigated proportions. So, if anybody, send me an email if you want. My name is hebertjerome@gmail.com. That's HEBERTJEROME@gmail.com. If you think I'm crazy, or if you think I have a good idea or two, if you want to help out, I have a YouTube channel at youtube.com. And I am the Sane Environmentalist on youtube.com. So that's very interesting. So I side with. Anybody heard of that? I side with.com. Hard to tell. Let's see what people say about fracking. Fracking. And the question was 48% yes, 52% no. That's amazing. Yes, 39% yes, but with increased oversight, 5%. And yes, but not in heavily populated areas, 4%. And on the no side, actually fewer people just said no. So, actually there's 14% that said no, we should pursue more sustainable energy resources, and no, more research is needed to measure the long-term effects of fracking. So fracking is another one. You know, if we quit oil, you know, fracking creates its own thing. Drilling for oil, extracting oil and coal creates its own thing. You know, there's nuclear pollution that happens with that. Excuse me, folks. So, at any rate, my name is Jerome. I am the Sane Environmentalist. I apologize for the dead air again. I'm going to figure something out permanent that will work perfectly today, I promise. And with that said, I hope everybody has a good day. And yada, 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 yada. Look forward to more on 1 tree per 100 pounds campaign, or whatever it boils down to. And I'll see you guys next week. Try to not get dead air. Please, again, email me if you have any ideas on how I can make Skype better. I don't know. Maybe I need to be using a computer instead of a cell phone, but